Mateo Flores's breath hitched, a wet, rattling sound that snagged Kaelen Novak's own lungs. His eyes, wide with a fear that mirrored hers, darted between the towering figures of Dr. Zaki Al-Farsi and Dr. Ndidi Okoro. But their gazes were fixed on the charts, not the man struggling for air. Anxiety, Al-Farsi drawled, a dismissive flick of his wrist. And no insurance. Dr. Okoro nodded, her perfectly coiffed head barely acknowledging the patient's gasps. Kaelen felt a cold dread bloom in her chest. This wasn't anxiety. This was different. She opened her mouth, a quiet, urgent, "Excuse me, doctors," but his airway. "Novak," Dr. Okoro cut in, her tone razor-sharp, "stick to your duties. We'll handle the diagnosis." The rebuke, public and pointed, burned Kaelen's cheeks. Humiliation washed over her, yet it couldn't drown out the insistent alarm bell screaming in her gut. She'd seen this kind of desperation before, in places far from this sterile, dismissive hospital. Mateo's failing breaths were a challenge she knew, instinctively, she would have to face. The sterile air of Grandview Medical Center, usually a crisp scent of disinfectant and authority, now felt thick and suffocating to Kaelen. Mateo Flores, a man reduced to a medical chart and a bed number, thrashed weakly under the thin sheet, each inhale a desperate, rattling gasp. The pulse oximeter clipped to his finger screamed a silent alarm, its numbers plummeting steadily, a stark digital countdown. His skin, once a warm olive, was now acquiring an alarming ashen tint around his lips, a telltale sign Kaelen knew too well. This wasn't anxiety. This was the silent suffocation of a drowning man on dry land. She hovered near his bed, her hand itching to help, but protocol, and the formidable presence of Doctors Al-Farsi and Okoro, kept her rooted. They stood several feet away, engaged in a low-toned conversation that seemed to have nothing to do with the gasping patient just yards from them. Dr. Al-Farsi gestured towards a monitor, discussing a trending stock market index on his phone, a casual, almost bored expression on his face. Dr. Okoro, meanwhile, meticulously adjusted the expensive silk scarf draped around her neck, her back half turned to Mateo, her focus clearly elsewhere. Kaelen swallowed, her throat tight. "Doctors," she began again, her voice a little louder this time, cutting through the hum of the ER. "His oxygen saturation is dropping rapidly. I'm concerned his upper airway isn't just constricted, but collapsing in a way standard interventions won't address. It's almost like a unique anatomical resistance." She gestured vaguely towards Mateo's neck, trying to articulate the precise, unusual nature of the problem she instinctively recognized from makeshift tents in remote, underserved regions. There, textbook solutions were rare, and keen observation was survival. Dr. Al-Farsi finally looked up, a slow, deliberate turn of his head that felt more like a physical dismissal than an acknowledgement. A condescending smile played on his lips. "Novak, with all due respect, your concerns are noted. However, a patient presenting with an exacerbated anxiety attack, compounded by socioeconomic distress, often appears to have respiratory difficulties. It's quite common among non-compliant patients." He emphasized non-compliant with a sneer, implying Mateo's lack of insurance was a personal failing, not a systemic barrier. Dr. Okoro turned fully then, her expression a mask of cool displeasure. "Nurse Novak, I believe we've made ourselves clear. You are a rookie in this institution. We are highly experienced physicians. Are you suggesting you have a superior understanding of respiratory physiology than two board-certified specialists who have managed thousands of similar cases?" Her voice, though not raised, carried an icy weight, each word designed to cut Kaelen down to size. The message was clear: stay in your lane, little nurse. Humiliation burned Kaelen's ears, but it was quickly overshadowed by a surge of pure, unadulterated desperation. She could see Mateo's chest heaving, the frantic effort of his diaphragm, his eyes wide and pleading. He was dying, slowly, agonizingly, while these specialists debated their own perceived superiority. The image of a young mother she'd once seen in a mud-caked clinic, gasping with the same desperate rhythm, flashed in Kaelen's mind. She hadn't hesitated then. She couldn't now. His trachea is retracting unusually, Kaelen pressed, her voice trembling slightly, but firm. The sounds are different. It's not just bronchospasm, it's a structural collapse that's resistant to positive pressure. We need to consider an immediate, alternative airway management plan, or he won't last much longer. She felt like she was screaming underwater, her urgent words muffled by the thick wall of their arrogance. Al-Farsi merely chuckled, a dry, mirthless sound. Anatomical resistance, nurse. Are you proposing we rewrite medical textbooks based on your unique observations? He exchanged a knowing glance with Okoro, a silent agreement that Kaelen was not just inexperienced, but delusional. Perhaps you've watched too many medical dramas, Novak. This isn't a third World War zone, this is Grandview. We have protocols, and we follow them. The dismissive jibe about her past, a secret she rarely spoke of, stung. But the pain was fleeting, eclipsed by the escalating crisis at Mateo's bedside. His breathing had become a series of ragged, wet gasps. The monitor's persistent beep-beep-beep was now punctuated by a shrill, continuous tone, a flat line of his oxygen saturation. A deep, primal fear coiled in Kaelen's gut. They were letting him die. And her pleas, her warnings, were falling on deaf ears, drowned out by the thunder of their self-importance. The tension in the room was a palpable thing, a taut wire stretched to breaking point. Mateo's life hung by a fraying thread, and Kaelen, the unassuming rookie, was the only one who truly saw it. The shrill, continuous tone of the monitor's oxygen saturation alarm was no longer just a warning, it was a death knell. Mateo's chest, which had been heaving with strained effort, suddenly seized. His eyes, wide and terrified, rolled back, and a sickening gurgle rattled in his throat, a sound Kaelen knew meant the airway was closing definitively. His body went limp, a sudden, horrifying collapse that sent a ripple of icy dread through the room. Code Blue. He's crashing. Kaelen's voice, raw with terror, cut through the sudden, stunned silence that had followed Mateo's collapse. But it was unnecessary. The frantic pulsing of the numbers on the monitor, the sight of Mateo's now dusky skin, screamed the reality louder than any words. Dr. Al-Farsi, his face now stripped of its earlier smugness, barked orders. Crash cart. Airway management. Dr. Okoro, get an intubation tray ready, stat. The emergency team, already on edge from the preceding tension, sprang into motion. Nurses rushed forward, equipment clanged, and a new, frenetic energy consumed the room, but it was an energy born of panic, not control. Damn it, I've got this, Al-Farsi muttered, pushing a resident aside with a brusque hand. He seized the laryngoscope, his movements confident, almost aggressive. Just anxiety, he said. Just needs a little persuasion. The words, intended to reassure, were now a hollow echo, a desperate attempt to reclaim authority from the jaws of failure. Kaelen watched, her heart a drum against her ribs. She saw Al-Farsi insert the blade, saw him peer into Mateo's mouth, saw the slight furrow in his brow. She knew, with chilling certainty, what he was seeing, or rather, what he wasn't seeing. The textbook view of vocal cords, the clear path to the trachea, simply wasn't there for Mateo. His airway, she had observed, was a treacherous, collapsing labyrinth. Al-Farsi repositioned the scope, grunting. Come on, open up, you stubborn, there. He tried to guide the endotracheal tube. A tense second passed. Then another. He pulled back, frustration twisting his features. Damn it. Obstructed. Can't get a clear view. What the hell? Dr. Okoro stepped forward, her calm demeanor now visibly strained. Let me try, Saki. She took the scope, her hand steadier than Alfarsi's, her approach more measured. The room fell into an agonizing hush, broken only by the frantic beep-beep-beep of the falling saturation and the rhythmic compressions a nurse had begun on Mateo's chest. Every eye was on Okoro, every breath held in collective desperation. Kaelen's gaze was fixed on Mateo, whose chest now barely rose with the manual ventilation. She saw the efforts of the elite doctors, their practiced hands, their expensive equipment. And she saw them fail, again and again. Okoro tried twice, 3 times, each attempt more futile than the last. The tubes simply wouldn't go. It was like trying to thread a needle in a collapsing tunnel, just as Kaelen had known it would be. The epiglottis, its seizing, collapsing inward, Okoro finally spat out, her voice tight with disbelief and dawning panic. I can't. I just can't get past it. It's like the whole structure is gone. She pulled back, sweat beading on her forehead, her earlier composure shattered. The monitor's display was a terrifying cascade of dwindling numbers, oxygen saturation plunging into single digits. Mateo's lips were turning blue, his skin mottled. Time was dissolving like sugar in hot water. Every second was a hammer blow against the thin wall holding back the abyss. He's losing his airway completely, a resident yelled, his voice cracking. We're losing him. Alfarsi ran a hand through his hair, his eyes wide with a fear he usually reserved for losing his status, not a patient. Retube. Try a smaller tube. Force it, he ordered, desperation creeping into his tone. But Kaelen knew it was useless. The problem wasn't the size of the tube, it was the nature of the obstruction, the bizarre, atypical way Mateo's airway was failing. It wasn't a standard block, it was a systemic collapse. A chilling silence descended again, heavier this time, pregnant with the unspoken truth. The elite doctors, with all their protocols and prestige, were utterly, spectacularly failing. They were out of standard options, out of ideas, out of time. And in that terrifying, gaping void of their expertise, a desperate, impossible opening began to form for Kaelen. An opening born of fear, a sliver of hope carved from the jaws of despair. Mateo was dying, and the thunder of their self-importance had finally been drowned out by the screams of the flatlining monitor. Doesn't Kaelen's struggle resonate with that familiar feeling of being overlooked, of knowing you have something vital to offer but being dismissed? We've all been there, haven't we? If you're rooting for the underdog and believe in the quiet heroes who defy expectations, then we warmly invite you to join our growing global community right now. By hitting that subscribe button, you're not just supporting stories like Kaelen's, you're helping us bring even more powerful, inspiring narratives to life, stories that challenge prejudice and celebrate courage. Become a part of our community where every voice matters, and every subscription helps us create more content you'll love. Thank you for being here, and welcome. The flatline shrieked, an unholy siren echoing the death of hope in the sterile room. It was a sound Kaelen knew too well from dusty, makeshift clinics in places where the odds were always stacked against life. Here, in the gleaming Grandview Medical Center, it felt even more obscene. Dr. Alfarsi stood frozen, a mask of sheer disbelief and growing terror replacing his usual arrogance. His eyes darted from the monitor to Mateo, then back, as if searching for a mistake that would erase this nightmare. Dr. Okoro, usually radiating an icy composure, now looked brittle, her perfect bun slightly askew, her jaw slack. The elite doctors, the titans of their field, were shipwrecked. They had no answers, no solutions, only the grim, undeniable proof of their failure. In the vacuum of their expertise, the opening Kaelen had glimpsed earlier widened into a vast, terrifying chasm. Every instinct, every forgotten lesson from remote, chaotic emergencies, screamed at her. Mateo was dying, not from a simple obstruction, but from a systemic, atypical collapse that their rigid protocols couldn't comprehend. And Kaelen, the overlooked rookie, the one whose pleas had been dismissed as the nervous babbling of an amateur, was the only one who saw it. A cold dread coiled in her stomach, This wasn't just about a patient anymore. This was a precipice. To speak now, to defy them again, was to risk everything: her career, her reputation, possibly even her freedom. The weight of their scorn, the memory of their dismissive laughter, pressed down on her. Who are you, Kaelen Novak, to challenge the chief of medicine and the head of emergency? A small, trembling voice inside her whispered. But then, another image burned through the fear: Mateo's wide, terrified eyes as he gasped for air, his desperate grip on her hand, the quiet dignity of his struggle against a system that had already judged him. That image, coupled with the relentless, piercing shriek of the flatline, drowned out the inner tremor. This wasn't about ego or protocol. This was about a human life hanging by a thread, and Kaelen was holding the scissors. Her spine straightened, a subtle shift that went unnoticed by the panicked doctors. Her breath hitched, then steadied. She felt a surge of adrenaline, cold and clear, washing away the fog of fear. This was not the Kaelen who had cowered under their gaze. This was the Kaelen who had intubated a child on a dusty road with nothing but a broken headlamp and a prayer. This was the Kaelen who had learned to improvise, to adapt, to survive, where rules were luxuries. The standard approach won't work. Kaelen's voice cut through the despair-laden silence, surprisingly clear and calm. It wasn't loud, but it resonated with an authority born of absolute certainty. His posterior airway is collapsing, not just obstructed. The pressure is causing a further cascade. We need a different angle. A direct, retrograde approach with a modified intubation method. Al-Farsi snapped his head towards her, his eyes blazing with a mix of fury and disbelief. What are you talking about, Novak? Retrograde? We're losing him. This is not the time for your experimental theories. Dr. Okoro stepped forward, her face a mask of cold anger. Nurse Novak, your insubordination is beyond belief. We are following established protocols. You are risking your license, and this patient's life, with these outlandish suggestions. Protocols aren't working, Doctor, Kaelen countered, her gaze unwavering, meeting Okoro's frigid stare head-on. Standard intubation has failed twice. His oxygen saturation is plummeting. He's going into full arrest. There isn't time for another attempt with the same method. This isn't outlandish, it's a technique used in extreme airway trauma, precisely for these atypical collapses. It's a calculated risk, but it's the only option left. The monitor gave another agonizing series of blips, a final, fading heartbeat before the flatline returned with even greater urgency. Mateo's chest was still. Al-Farsi stared at the screen, then at Mateo's inert form, then finally, reluctantly, at Kaelen. His arrogance was battling with the stark reality of impending death. His face was a battlefield of warring emotions: humiliation, fear, a sliver of desperate hope. You're sure?" he rasped, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. To ask a rookie nurse for advice, to acknowledge her superior insight, was a concession that tore at his very being. "I am," Kaelen stated, her voice steady, radiating an unshakable conviction. "It's the only way we stand a chance." Dr. Okoro opened her mouth to object again, but Al-Farsi cut her off with a weary hand. His shoulders slumped in defeat. There was no other choice. Their prestigious degrees, their years of experience, their unyielding protocols, they had all failed. And a rookie nurse, with her unconventional wisdom and quiet resolve, was their last, desperate hope. "All right," Al-Farsi choked out, the single word a testament to the shattering of his ego. "Do it, Novak. But if you fail..." His threat hung in the air, hollow and impotent. Kaelen didn't flinch. She took a deep, fortifying breath, her eyes sweeping over the scattered instruments. The fear was still there, a faint tremor beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, driving purpose. The transformation had begun. The humble rookie nurse was gone, replaced by the ghost of a disaster relief medic, utterly focused, utterly courageous, ready to bend the rules and defy the odds to save a life. She moved swiftly, decisively, towards the intubation tray. The room, which had been paralyzed by despair, now held its breath, witnessing not just a procedure, but an audacious act of human will. The air in resuscitation room 3, which moments ago had been a whirlwind of panic and flailing expertise, now held a strange, brittle silence. Kaelen Novak stood at Mateo's bedside, a silhouette against the stark medical lights, her posture radiating a quiet authority that seemed utterly at odds with her humble uniform. She didn't look at the doctors, whose stunned faces were fixed on her, nor at the monitor whose incessant beeping marked Mateo's fading vitality. Her entire being was focused on the young man before her, a human puzzle box whose solution lay somewhere beyond the standard protocols. Her hands moved. Not with the practiced, almost mechanical efficiency of an ER veteran, but with a fluid, adaptive grace that spoke of instinct honed in environments where textbooks were luxuries and improvisation was survival. She picked up a laryngoscope, a familiar tool, yet in her grip, it seemed to transform. Dr. Al-Farsi, still simmering with a cocktail of indignation and disbelief, watched her closely, his arms crossed, a sneer ready to unfurl at the first sign of incompetence. Dr. Okoro, always more outwardly composed, merely observed, her expression a mask of detached skepticism, though a flicker of curiosity, quickly suppressed, crossed her features. Kaelen didn't immediately attempt intubation. Instead, she performed a series of rapid, almost imperceptible assessments, her fingertips dancing along Mateo's neck, a subtle tilt of his head, a quick scan of the monitors. Her eyes, usually soft and empathetic, were now sharp, analytical, the eyes of a medic who knew that every second was a battle against entropy. She wasn't just looking for an airway, she was hunting for the specific, aberrant collapse she'd identified, the one that had stumped the giants of Grandview. Then, she modified the laryngoscope. A slight, almost imperceptible adjustment to the blade, a twist of the wrist that made Al-Farsi's eyebrows furrow. "What is she doing?" he muttered, unable to keep his voice entirely free of suspicion. No one answered. The nurses, usually bustling, were frozen in place, their gazes riveted. Kaelen's movements were economical, deliberate. She positioned herself, her stance wide and balanced, a fighter preparing for a difficult bout. When she finally introduced the modified instrument into Mateo's mouth, there was no hesitation, no fumbling. Her hand, steady as stone, guided it with absolute precision. The room collectively held its breath, a palpable tension coiling around them. The doctors leaned forward imperceptibly, their initial scorn slowly giving way to a grudging, unsettling fascination. Al-Farsi watched, his expert eyes tracking her every motion. He expected the usual struggle, the frantic repositioning, the desperate search for the elusive chords that had defied him. But Kaelen didn't struggle. She didn't hesitate. She navigated the treacherous landscape of Mateo's constricted airway not by force, but by an almost intuitive understanding of its unique topography. It was like watching a sculptor coax form from raw clay, rather than a mechanic forcing a part into place. Then, a subtle shift. Al-Farsi saw it first, a flicker on the monitor, a slight improvement in the waveform, barely noticeable, yet there. He straightened, his sneer momentarily forgotten, replaced by a frown of pure bafflement. Okoro's eyes narrowed. She saw it too. Kaelen wasn't just trying a new technique, she was executing a different philosophy of airway management entirely. She wasn't fighting the anatomy, she was persuading it. Kaelen, meanwhile, felt the familiar echoes of long-forgotten nights under a canvas tent, the distant wail of sirens, the desperate need for light in utter darkness. Each move was a memory, each micro-adjustment a lesson learned when sterile environments and ample resources were distant dreams. The faces of the wounded, the dying, the ones she couldn't save, flashed through her mind, driving her forward. She was not just Kaelen Novak, rookie nurse, she was every medic, every healer, every desperate soul who had ever defied the odds with nothing but grit and ingenuity. A bead of sweat traced a path down her temple, but her concentration remained absolute. Her fingers, strong and nimble, worked with a delicate force, a controlled power that resonated through the silent room. She repositioned Mateo's head, not once, but twice, each subtle shift revealing a fraction more of the obscured pathway. The standard texts would have called it unorthodox, perhaps even reckless. But it was working. Or, at least, it appeared to be working, in a way the elite attempts had spectacularly failed. The tension in the room was no longer solely born of fear, but of a dawning, unsettling awe. The doctors weren't just watching a procedure, they were witnessing a quiet revolution, unfolding before their astonished eyes. The air in the resuscitation bay, once thick with the acrid scent of adrenaline and despair, now held a new, fragile hope. Kaelen's breath hitched, not from exertion, but from the pinpoint focus that had consumed her entire being. Her fingers, still poised, felt the almost imperceptible tremor of success. There it was, a faint, but distinct, rush of air. A sound so minute, yet it resonated like a thunderclap in the suffocating silence. Then, the monitor, which had wailed like a banshee just moments before, began to sing a new, steady rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. Slow at first, then gaining a confident cadence. Mateo's chest, which had been heaving erratically, rose and fell with a shallow, but even, breath. The bluish tint around his lips began to recede, replaced by a subtle, returning warmth. Life, which had been fleeing, was now, miraculously, flowing back. Kaelen felt at first, an almost painful release in her own chest, as if a vice had been loosened. Her shoulders slumped infinitesimally, the immense weight she'd carried for what felt like an eternity finally shifting. Her eyes, still wide with concentration, found Mateo's face, pale and still, but no longer spectral. He was breathing. He was breathing. A collective, shuddering exhalation swept through the room. It wasn't a cheer, not yet. It was something far more primal, the sound of a dozen people holding their breath for too long, finally allowing themselves to breathe again. Dr. Al-Farsi, whose face had been a mask of stone, now looked as though he'd seen a ghost, or perhaps, a miracle he couldn't explain. Dr. Okoro's initial disdain had morphed into a stunned blankness, her mouth slightly agape. The residents and nurses, frozen in their positions, blinked, as if waking from a nightmare. Kaelen slowly withdrew her hands, a faint tremor running through her fingertips. She looked down at them, seeing not just her own hands, but the countless hours of desperate ingenuity, the makeshift solutions in makeshift clinics, the faces of those she had saved and those she couldn't. Every ounce of her unconventional past had converged into this single, triumphant moment. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was pregnant with unsaid things, with the crushing weight of shattered expectations and undeniable proof. Dr. Al-Farsi was the first to move, stepping closer, his eyes fixed on the monitor, then on Mateo, and finally, on Kaelen. His jaw worked, clearly struggling to form words. His sats, they're stabilizing, he rasped, his voice rough, stripped of its usual bravado. It was a simple observation, a clinical fact, but in that moment, it was an admission of defeat and, grudgingly, of validation. He's stable. Dr. Okoro cleared her throat, her usual imperiousness cracking. Against all odds, she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else, her gaze flitting between Kaelen's exhausted face and Mateo's slowly improving one. The subtext was clear, we thought you were wrong. We were wrong. Kaelen, still processing the monumental shift, simply nodded. She didn't need their fanfare, their praise, or their apology. The steady beep of the monitor, Mateo's returning breath, the quiet relief washing over the terrified family members who had been allowed to peer through the glass, that was her reward. A single tear, born of sheer exhaustion and overwhelming relief, tracked a path down Kaelen's temple, merging with the earlier bead of sweat. She hadn't wept in years, not like this. This wasn't sorrow, it was the raw, beautiful release of having wrestled with death and emerged victorious. The catharsis was absolute, profound. She looked around the room, meeting the gazes of the junior staff, who now looked at her with a mixture of awe and dawning respect. Their silent acknowledgement was a balm. "Someone get him to ICU," Kaelen said, her voice a little hoarse, but steady. The command, given without a hint of question, was no longer the plea of a rookie nurse but the directive of someone who had just proven her mettle, who had literally snatched life from the jaws of death when the so-called experts had faltered. The room, which had once dismissed her, now moved with a new deference, an unspoken understanding that Kaelen Novak was not just a nurse, but the nurse who had saved Mateo Flores. The elite facade had cracked, revealing the raw, beating heart of true medicine. The sterile air in the ER crackled, thick with the aftermath of a miracle. Mateo's chest rose and fell in a steady, reassuring rhythm, the monitor's gentle beeps a triumphant symphony. Silence, profound and heavy, blanketed the room, a silence less about exhaustion and more about stunned comprehension. Dr. Al-Farsi, his face a canvas of disbelief, was the first to stir. He cleared his throat, a small, forced sound that seemed to scrape against the quiet. His eyes, usually sharp with command, darted between Kaelen and the stabilized patient, struggling to reconcile the impossible. "Get him to ICU. Now," he barked, the words devoid of their usual condescension, carrying a hollow ring. He didn't look at Kaelen, but his sudden briskness, his inability to meet her gaze, spoke volumes. It was a retreat, a desperate attempt to reassert control over a situation that had just spun wildly beyond his grasp, before being snatched back by the least likely person. Dr. Okoro, usually so composed, looked utterly undone. Her shoulders, typically rigid with authority, seemed to slump. She watched Kaelen with an expression Kaelen couldn't quite decipher, a mix of shock, a grudging flicker of respect, and perhaps, a sliver of shame. She offered no words, just a slow, almost imperceptible nod in Kaelen's direction before turning to oversee Mateo's transfer. It was not an apology, but it was an acknowledgement, a crack in her impenetrable professional facade. The junior nurses, however, harbored no such reservations. Maria, the nurse Kaelen had shared glances with earlier, was openly weeping, tears of relief and awe streaming down her face. She rushed to Kaelen, her hands reaching out to grasp Kaelen's arm. "Kaelen, you saved him," she choked out, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how, but you did it." Her eyes, wide and shining, held a reverence Kaelen had never seen directed at herself. Kaelen offered a tired, but gentle smile. "We all did, Maria. We just kept fighting for him." Even in triumph, her humility shone through, deflecting the hero worship, grounding the moment in shared effort. Just then, a frantic voice cut through the air. "Mateo! Is he okay?" Mateo's wife, Elena, her face streaked with tears and worry, burst into the ER, flanked by two anxious teenage children. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on her husband being carefully prepped for transport, then swept around, desperate for answers. Her gaze found Kaelen, who was still standing near Mateo's bedside, a silent sentinel. Kaelen moved towards her, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "He's stable, Elena," Kaelen said softly, her voice carrying a calm authority that instantly soothed. "He's going to be okay. He's a fighter." Elena collapsed against Kaelen, sobbing into her shoulder, her small frame shaking. "Thank you, oh God, thank you. They said it was hopeless. You gave him back to us." Her words, raw and heartfelt, were the truest validation Kaelen could have received. This wasn't about protocols or prestige, it was about a family's joy, a life returned. Kaelen wrapped an arm around the woman, her own eyes welling up again, a quiet understanding passing between them. Mateo's son, a boy barely old enough to shave, looked at Kaelen with wide, astonished eyes. "How did you do that?" he whispered, pointing vaguely at the sophisticated tubes now steadying his father. No one else could. Kaelen paused, a brief, distant look in her eyes. Sometimes, she began, her voice low, a hint of a far-off place in her tone, when you've seen things fall apart, when you've been in places where you don't have all this, she gestured subtly at the gleaming, high-tech equipment surrounding them, you learn to look at things differently. You learn that necessity is the fiercest teacher. You learn to make do, to improvise, to find a way to make anything work, because there's simply no other choice. It teaches you to trust your instincts, even when everyone else is following the book. It wasn't a boast, but a quiet, almost wistful explanation of where her unconventional expertise truly came from, not a pristine medical school lecture hall, but the chaotic, desperate front lines of humanitarian crises. It was the whisper of a past forged in resilience, a life spent valuing life itself above all else. The other junior staff, overhearing her words, exchanged glances. The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just a smart nurse, this was someone shaped by a different kind of crucible, someone whose empathy extended beyond the hospital walls, someone whose quiet demeanor hid a fierce, adaptable spirit forged in adversity. Kaelen Novak was not merely qualified, she was tested. Kaelen gently disentangled herself from Elena, offering another reassuring squeeze of her hand. He'll be in good hands in the ICU. Go with him. As Elena moved towards her husband, Kaelen stood for a moment, absorbing the shift in the room. The dismissive stares were gone, replaced by respectful, even admiring, gazes. The transformation wasn't just in their eyes, but in the air itself, thick now with a newfound reverence for the unassuming nurse who had defied all odds. Her quiet pride wasn't about accolades, but about the profound satisfaction of knowing she had honored her unique path, saved a life, and, in doing so, had finally been truly seen. The aftermath at Grandview Medical Center was less a seismic shock and more a slow, undeniable tremor, radiating outward from the precise spot where Kaelen Novak had defied the odds. The initial silence of Dr. Alfarsi and Dr. Okoro had morphed into a forced professionalism, a careful choreography of reports and consultations. But the shift was palpable, etched in the subtle narrowing of eyes when Kaelen passed, the sudden, hushed cessation of conversations, and the almost imperceptible hesitation before they issued an order she might question. An internal inquiry was inevitable. The severity of Mateo Flores' initial dismissal, coupled with the dramatic intervention and the clear disparity in care based on his uninsured status, drew scrutiny from hospital administration. Dr. Alfarsi and Dr. Okoro found themselves facing uncomfortable questions, not just about their medical judgment, but about their biases. There were no public reprimands, no grand demotions. Grandview, after all, valued its elite facade. But behind closed doors, the consequences were real. Mandatory sensitivity training, a temporary reallocation of oversight duties, and perhaps most painful for them, a dent in their previously unassailable professional reputations. The seed of doubt Kaelen had planted had begun to sprout, forcing them to at least consider the implications of their casual disdain. They were, in essence, compelled to temper their arrogance, if only for self-preservation. For Dr. Okoro, the experience was a bitter pill, a wound to her carefully constructed authority. For Dr. Alfarsi, there was a grudging, almost imperceptible shift, a flicker of something akin to respect for Kaelen's skill, hidden beneath layers of professional pique. The incident, for all its discomfort, had subtly widened their perspective, forcing them to look beyond the surface of a patient's insurance card. Mateo Flores, against all odds, made a full recovery. His lungs, miraculously, began to heal, the atypical reaction fading as his body slowly regained its strength. He left Grandview Medical Center a few weeks later, frail but alive, a living testament to Kaelen's courage. His gratitude, and that of his wife, Elena, was boundless. They visited Kaelen before he discharged, offering a small, hand-knitted scarf Elena had made, a tangible symbol of the life she had saved. Mateo, holding Kaelen's hand, simply said, "You saw me. You truly saw me." His journey became a powerful narrative within the community, a stark reminder of the fragile balance between human compassion and systemic indifference, and an undeniable beacon of hope that individual action could indeed pierce the darkest corners of prejudice. As for Kaelen, Grandview Medical Center was irrevocably changed for her, and she for it. The whispered "rookie" was replaced by Nurse Novak, delivered with a newfound reverence. Her suggestions, once dismissed, were now considered with thoughtful attention. Her quiet, observant nature, previously overlooked, became a mark of her profound expertise. She was still Kaelen, the same humble, compassionate nurse, but now she moved through the elite halls with an unshakable confidence, a quiet authority earned through fire. Her disaster relief experience, once a hidden secret, was now openly acknowledged, a unique and valuable asset the hospital begrudgingly learned to appreciate. She didn't become a manager or seek a spotlight, that wasn't her authentic path. Instead, Kaelen embraced her true calling, applying her skills where they were most needed, often mentoring younger nurses, sharing her unique perspective on unconventional solutions and compassionate care. She taught them that sometimes, the most profound answers lay outside the textbook, in the quiet corners of empathy and the courage to challenge the status quo. Her Eastern European roots, once a source of perceived otherness, now added to her unique mystique, a testament to the diverse wellsprings of human resilience. The cracks in Grandview's elite facade were still visible, but Kaelen's act had widened them, allowing a glimmer of light to shine through. The hospital was forced to reevaluate its protocols, its implicit biases, and the true meaning of comprehensive care. It was a slow, arduous process, but it had begun. Kaelen Novak, no longer just an overlooked rookie, walked with the steady gait of a true hero, not one seeking glory, but one grounded in the unwavering belief that every life holds immeasurable value. Her story became a quiet anthem of hope, a reminder that humanity's deepest strengths often emerge in the most unexpected places, inspiring change not through grand pronouncements, but through the enduring power of a single, courageous heart. The transformation wasn't just about a patient saved or a nurse recognized, it was about the subtle, profound evolution of a community, a system, and the human spirit itself, all touched by the fierce, quiet light of Kaelen Novak. Kaelen's journey reminds us that true heroism often emerges from quiet courage, challenging systems, and valuing every single life. Her transformation sparks hope for a more compassionate world. What part of Kaelen's story resonated most deeply with you? Share your thoughts below. If her fierce, quiet light inspired you, please consider joining our growing global community. Your subscription helps us bring more powerful, character-driven stories like this one to life, connecting us all through shared human experiences. Thank you so much for watching, for being part of our journey, and for valuing the narratives we create together. We truly appreciate your support.